little gizmo started. This is one of the diagrams from the book. We talked about the inverse relationship between price of bonds and the interest rate. What did that come about from? Why is that relationship out there? Price of bond and the interest rate. Interest rates go up, price of the bond falls. Interest rates go down, price of bond rises.
Why is it there?
Yeah, why does that relationship hold? It's kind of a fairly simple answer, a short answer.
Market values.
They're negatively related, and why? What tells us that, or what? You're right. That's the negative relationship. Because why? It's the price of the bond, and it's kind of reflecting maybe alternatives of money. What is that? It's in that formula.
Elsewhere.
What about that formula we looked at?
Well, when you divide by a bigger number.
Yeah, it just holds straight from the formula. Yeah, so there's not some magical, like, sometimes it holds, sometimes it doesn't. It's just the way it works. It's just the way the formula works. So we worked through a number of different types of formulas. But one of them was the price of the bond. Let's see, your book tends to superscript, which is going to be hard for me to do. But the price of a bond is equal to the coupon rate over, like, the face value, where one of these things, if the coupon rate changes, and that's our interest rate. Wait a second, I'm not. I'll show this a little bit differently. Let's do it this way. The price of a bond equals the discounted flows, which was 1 plus the interest rate raised to the number of time periods. That, and then we can add on more stuff to it, but if the interest rate goes up, the price of the bond goes down. If the denominator gets bigger, the price changes and goes down. So that is the inverse relationship. This thing can be confusing. Even what they're saying here, the yield to maturity on a 10% coupon rate bond maturing in 10 years has a face value of 1,000. And then we've got different prices and different yields to maturity. That's the yield to maturity is solving for the little I. Remember the dilemma we ran into last time that you can just easily algebraically solve for? Well, that's the yield to maturity. And the thing I think that makes this confusing is if you don't think of it maybe being a 20-year bond with 10 years left. So originally, somebody gave up $1,000. And I should more appropriately put time period as 0 here. Somebody gave up $1,000, and at the end of 20 years, they'll get their $1,000 back. And if the coupon rate was 10%, what is the coupon payment in year 1? $100. And then it's 100 all the way to the end of the bond. And that's it. You can buy it, hold it for 20 years, and this is your situation, right? However, what we brought up last time was, what if in year 10 we need some cash? We want to sell this thing. What's it worth now? Now we're looking at this picture. Now we come here, because interest rates over the previous 10 years may be higher than 10%, they may be lower than 10%. And what the current interest rate environment is determines what the price of the bond is. And now we can backdoor it. So now we go to Wall Street and say, you know, Grandma gave me this 20-year bond for $1,000 and I'm going to sell it. So I open up my Wall Street Journal and I learned that I can sell that thing for $1,100. Right? Now I have a new present value problem. I can compare that $1,100 price with the payment streams that are left. The payment streams that are left are still 100 from year 10 all the way out to the 1,000 plus the 100 in the last time frame. Now I have a new problem to solve. The interest rate that solves that problem that we were doing, remember I got to take this one and I got to divide it by 1 plus the interest rate raised to the, if this is in the 15th year, to the 5th power, right? And I got 10 of those suckers to do, as we discussed. That is the yield to maturity, that little interest rate. And that's this number. This little table calculated for us. So at $1,100, the yield to maturity is 8.48%. Okay? So what that's telling us is that the interest rate on a 10-year bond, a brand new one issued by the government in year 10, what's its yield? 8.48%, right? Okay? So we end up kind of toggling back and forth depending on what variable we're looking at. And that's where I think some of the confusion comes in. So try to lay out the timeline, I think, is a good pragmatic way to go about solving these when you see the problems. Question, Michael?
I was just going to say, are we going to see the market rate reflected as yield to maturity? Is that what we're going to see?
So those two will equalize, but the reason we call it the yield to maturity is that we're specifically tying it to this bond. The yield to maturity will tend to equal the current coupon or current yields of brand new bonds. Remember, the current yield is the coupon payment divided by the price of the bond. On a brand new issue of a 10-year bond, in the marketplace, we'd expect the current yield of brand new bonds to be equal to the yield to maturity of old bonds. Because the risk is the same. They're really the same instrument. There's no additional risk you're taking on by buying an old bond versus buying a brand new bond. It's really the same thing in terms of all of its real aspects. Okay. So the coupon bond is priced at its face value. The yield to when it's priced at its face value, the yield to maturity is equal to its coupon rate. So if in year 10 the 20-year bond has a market price of 1,000, then we do this calculation, it's going to turn out to be 10%. The yield to maturity of the old bond happens to be equal to the coupon rate that it was 10 years ago, which would be an unusual case, right? That's just kind of that would be an oddball thing to happen, but it's possible. It's more likely to be higher if the bond is selling at a premium and current market rates are lower than what they were 10 years ago, or selling at a discount because current market rates are higher than what they were 10 years ago. All right, questions there? All right, so you probably need to work through a little problems. You'll have some of those in your homework problems to get kind of a little more going on that. I want to get to this one. Again, this is something that we talked about. But this table, now that we've talked about it, hopefully doesn't look like, whoa, what the heck's going on with this sucker? We can kind of break this apart, I think, a little easier now. These are just the different components. So a 1-year return on different maturity, 30, 20, 10, 5, 2, 1, different returns, different maturity, 10% coupon rate bonds, when the interest rate rises from 10 to 20%. So now we're kind of thinking about a situation where interest rates jumped on us sometime in the process from 10% to 20%. As interest rates rise, what happens to the value of the bond? While I'm holding it, the price goes down. And that's what we're seeing here, is a huge hit on that capital gain portion. Buy low, sell high is what we'd like to do. Well, now we're really sucking at that because it's buy at 1,000 and sell at 500. we've lost 50% of our money, right? So it's a combination then. You still have this current yield of 10%, but the price, the price next year is expected to be a lot lower because of the rise in the interest rates while we're holding it. And that affects your overall return. So people who hold bonds, if you're an active player in the bond market, if you're a mutual fund company that part of your portfolio holds bonds, you pay attention to this because you are not typically buying bonds and holding them the whole term. If you're an insurance company, that's not quite the same. A lot of times insurance companies will buy bonds and hold them the duration. Now, why is that? If you're a life insurance company, might you be more interested in buying a 20-year bond and actually holding on to it?
You don't really care about whether the price goes up or down. You just want the money at the end.
You want the money at the end, right? So if you just made out a insurance policy for Russ McCullough, who's 43, and you know he's going to get a higher probability of croaking 20 years from now. He may just live to 80, hopefully. But he's got a higher chance of croaking 20 years from now. Right now, I can loan money to a big blue chip company like Apple or something. I can buy one of their 20-year bonds. And as long as they promise me to pay 10% and I feel pretty comfortable that business is going to be around in the next 20 years, it's just, then I might just buy that and hold it. I just want to know for sure that I'm going to get 10%. Because that's going to more than cover my investment on the chance that McCullough gets hit by a car 5 years from now in a car wreck, right? And I have to pay out. I'm kind of playing that longer term game. Now, if you're a mutual fund company, you're just always continually churning these bonds. Like you're kind of buying and selling. So part of the game might be some longer term holds, but part of it is analyzing the whole portfolio. And so they pay attention to current interest rates. The value of their portfolio might go down, which when we start to talk about regulations on what they can and can't do, if their asset values have gone down because the market's gone down and interest rates have gone up and so the prices have plummeted, then you used to have a company with a net worth of $1 billion and now it's a net worth of half of that if all of your bonds took a dump. Right? Which, from a cash flow standpoint, if you're just holding them, doesn't matter. But if that's not the game you're playing, you might have to shore up some of your reserves and bring in some good hard cash at a time that's kind of difficult to do. All right, so questions or comments there? I got the initial price next year. Here's the return, so look at what happens here with the 1 year. It's not too big of a deal. We still get a 10% if we're just holding on to the bond. We still get our 10%, which was our current yield. And this is just showing the impact of an interest rate uptick that could hurt us on our bond returns. Questions there? See something you're not quite, you just want to get a little wrinkle of the brow that... All right. So we've talked a lot about interest rate, and I almost kind of hinted at this. There is no interest rate risk for any bond whose time to maturity matches the holding period. So in other words, what we were just saying with that life insurance company, if you hold it, you're going to get the 10%. There's no interest rate risk. Is there no risk? Is it risk-free then? What kind of risk do they face? Default risk. Yeah, so there's different types of risk. So if I used Apple, if Apple goes belly up and we're holding on to that long-term instrument, then we might be not getting paid. So that's the default risk. So we'll start kind of looking at different types of risk we might face. If we are holding a foreign bond, we might face interest rate risk, default risk, and what other kind of risk? If we're holding a foreign bond.
Foreign exchange
the foreign exchange rate risk, right? So then we face some exchange rate risk that when the thing comes due and when I have euros in my hand, I got to convert those euros back to dollars, and I might get screwed on that. So I faced exchange rate risk. So there's multiple layers of risk that I might be facing in any given investment. Okay. We're going to talk about Mr. Fisher here, Irving Fisher, with the Fisher formula, and the relationship between interest rates and inflation. We've kind of ignored that up to this point, and that's kind of the last part of this chapter, is to bring interest rates in. So nominal interest rates make no allowance for inflation. Real interest rates do. So talk to me. Put that in terms of why that's important to consider inflation. Real rate versus nominal rate. Tell me a story here of maybe this bond or some other example of how inflation plays an important role for the bondholder, or potentially an important role. Let's see. I think we need to go to the random number generator. Mal, give me a number between 3 and 11. 7. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Michael, what do you think here? Inflation. Let me give you the easy, well, maybe easy. I shouldn't say that. Not necessarily easy. What is inflation?
General rise in prices.
Good. General rise in prices. So inflation, let's see, am I okay? Yes, I can use that in here. Inflation is the rate of change of the price level, the new number minus the old number divided by the old number. So it's the rate of change of the consumer price index, let's say, an index that measures the prices of real stuff we care about. So this is inflation. The price level, PL is the price level, this is the average level of all prices of goods and services in the economy. All right, so the price level is, Michael used the word general, so an average or general increase in inflation is when the new number is bigger than the old number, and it goes up by 3%, tells us that all goods and services have been rising on average by 3%. Okay, so that's the first part. Let's see, what was our number again? 7? 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Cadence. So what's this real, why do we care about that? In terms of, now getting back to our bond scenario, the real versus the nominal rate. So the rate of return, the bond tells us that we're going to earn 10% on our money. Why do I care about inflation? Get it in what respect? The piece of paper tells me I'm going to get it. So you bring up a good point here. If I bought the $1,000 bond here, and I got $100, $100, $100, $100, and then I finally got, at the very end here, I got my last 1,000 back, plus my 100. On paper, I got my 10% return, just like they said. So I got the 10%. So what does it mean to really get the 10% versus to get it nominally or on paper?
Is the time value money
Okay. Chris?
And the value of the dollar has gone down. It's not the same as it was when you
Okay, you're real close. Isn't invaluable in terms of what?
In terms of what you can buy with
In
it.
terms of what you can buy with it. That's the one thing we got to kind of hang our hat on, is the purchasing power. So I thought my $1,000 could buy a basket of goods. Real goods. Maybe some chicken wings, maybe some beer, some pork, and a little sausage in here, and some ice cream cones. Right? I've got all this little shopping cart full of what $1,000 of stuff could buy. What I like as a human being is I like stuff, actually. If we really think hard about it, we don't like money. We like what money gets us, right? The whole purpose of the money, and even if we're charitable at heart, it's what that money does for somebody else in terms of the real benefits it brings in terms of food on their plate, clothes on their back if we're trying to help out the poor. So at the end of the day, money is the veil of society. It kind of is this mask. If we part the curtain like we like to do in econ class and we look around, the money, what we care about is the real stuff that the money buys. And so if the prices of this stuff has gone up, and I have my $1,100, not to mention the coupon payments that were here, can I really go out and buy $100 more stuff? No, not in terms of the shopping cart. My extra $100, if inflation was high enough, in fact, if inflation was 20%, just to be kind of obnoxious about it, my shopping cart might only be filled with half of what I could do 20 years ago, right? So if I started to think about it that way, I can have half as many ice cream cones, half as many chicken wings, half as much beer, and my shopping cart is only half the level that it used to be before in terms of the stuff that I can get. That's the power of inflation, and why it's so important when we start to get into interest rates and money here to calculate that inflation rate, because lenders and borrowers need to factor that into their purchase to be thinking straight about it. All right, so Irving Fisher came up with a nice little shortcut for us. I've been historically, sometimes to a fault, love shortcuts. So the Fisher formula, and this is kind of the shortcut. There is a long cut to it too, a little bit more sophisticated formula that you can see in the small print in your textbook towards the bottom. But this is kind of the shortcut method here, is simply you can calculate your real rate of return as the nominal rate minus the inflation rate. And I'm thinking that your book might use RR.
This is
R sub or super?
below.
Subscript? Okay. So RR, the real rate.
No, you said I subscript.
Yeah.
Oh, I
It uses
subscript
two
R.
I's.
Okay.
A regular I and then one with a subscript.
With a subscript I?
Yeah. No,
No,
I
subscript R.
Oh yeah, because well, they got the I subscript C for the coupon yield. I subscript R. Yep. Okay, good. Thank goodness they used the little script I, because this is the way I've been doing it for years. Some textbooks don't use that either, and then I get really messed up. Okay, good. So the real rate of interest is equal to the difference between the 10% you're getting and the inflation rate. So if little I equals 10% and inflation equals 3%, we've got the real rate of interest equal to 10 minus 3 equals 7%. Now, given what we've said, give me an interpretation of the 7%. Telling kind of the whole story. Reno?
Yes,
Good, more purchasing power. You got to tie it back to the goods and services. So you've got 10% more dollars that can only buy 7% more stuff, right? So my real rate of return is 7, means that you can buy 7% more stuff, even though you were paid 10% more money. Your nominal return was 10, but your purchasing power only climbed by 7. So, we've got 2 ways of looking at this. Ex post and ex ante. Have you guys used these in other classes, those terms? My brainiac PhD microeconomics professor, Harvey LePan, his voice just has always rang in my head when he brought up this comment on ex post, and it had to do with decision making. And he said, you can't judge a decision ex post. You can't judge a decision, like that was a bad decision. You can't judge a decision ex post. You can't judge a decision after the fact. So you can kind of think of ex post as after the fact. After all the details are known with certainty, once the facts are in, we can do an ex post analysis. Good decisions, decision making on whether it was a good decision or bad decision, is how well you do ex ante, before the fact. Before the facts are in, how well did you make a decision? That's more of the art form. This is where economics plays a little bit bigger role in terms of predictions, right? All right. So, did I see a question? Okay. What did we do here? Ex post or ex ante? With this little example I just went through. Ex post. Why?
Because
it was after you cashed in your bond, so what things did you know with certainty? You got the 10%, and what else did you know with certainty? And the inflation rate. It was after the fact. So we knew that the Federal Reserve told us that the inflation rate was 3%. So we knew things with certainty after the fact. And we could go backwards and calculate what the real rate of return was. So for an ex ante analysis, what do you think we need to do? Following Fisher's logic here. In order to make a ex ante analysis, what do we need to do?
probably look at trends.
Predict what the inflation is going to be, right? Come up with an expectation, a reasonable expectation, a rational expectation. If we want to push it to that level, that you've done your homework, your research, you've studied, you've come up with maybe using some other research, and you've read and you've learned. And so for an ex ante analysis, we have the expected real return. Whoops, let me do the IR. The expected real return, so I put a little superscript E, is equal to the nominal return, which may be known with certainty, minus the default risk. If I buy this bond in a bond environment, I know if I hold it the length of the term, I'm going to get 10%. So that might have some certainty to it, minus the expected inflation rate. So here is our ex ante look at the Fisher formula. Okay. So when we make decisions of whether I should borrow money or whether I should lend money, part of that's due to inflation expectations. And we'll see how that plays a role in the bond market, which we're going to jump into next. Chapter 5. So, with this chapter, we're going to get into some supply and demand stuff, which we haven't done yet. And we're going to look at a view of financial instruments, a view of bonds through what's called asset demand. So, and this is going to be very similar to the demand for beer, except now we're going to have the demand for bonds, right? So the supply and demand for bonds. And this is chapter 5 stuff. All right, so the law of demand. Let's remind ourselves. Let's go right back to principles class. Price goes up. What happens? Demand. What did you say, Sawyer?
I said quantity.
I thought you did, and that's why I wanted to highlight. I thought I heard that. The quantity demanded goes down. So we're going to make that little distinction on the quantity of purchases, and just be a little bit careful there on whether we're talking about the demand, which would be the demand curve for bonds, versus maybe the reaction of purchases. So the law of demand is an increase in the price, and now let's put this in the context of bonds. An increase in the price of bonds leads to a decrease in the quantity demanded of bonds. Price goes up, we buy less. Price goes down, we buy more. Which is absolutely false unless we add maybe a couple words after that. Ceteris paribus, that one that economists have to hammer on because the world's way too complex to make such a simple statement, but we make it that way by adding on ceteris paribus, holding all other things constant. As long as the world doesn't change at all, except for the price. Price goes up, I'll buy less, but everything else in the world is going to remain the same too. Now we can make that claim. So that's our law of demand. All right, so what are the determinants in the bond market? They're slightly different than what we saw with the demand for beer, but not too far off. There's a lot of similarities. So the first one we're going to look at is our wealth. So these end up being demand shifters. These are the ceteris paribus things, the things that we held constant when we looked at the demand. Just for fun, I guess, if you guys want to put down a BD curve. Sorry, I already put the B more generically. So the textbook uses a big B with a superscript D for bond demand. And then over here we've got the price of bonds, and this is the quantity. I guess if we don't add supply at this point, we can even put the quantity demanded of bonds. The law of demand says price of bond falls from P1 to P2. People buy more from Q1 to Q2. A movement along a stationary demand curve. Demand shifters. Wealth. What is our wealth? Personal wealth, let's say. Let's look at it as at an individual level. If somebody's wealthy, how is their wealth measured? Okay, everything we own. Good. So the accumulation of assets. And then there's one other part that the book kind of glosses over, but it's important to think about. Your debt minus your debt minus what you owe. So what you own minus what you owe is your wealth. So it's your total resources owned less what you owe if you have any debts. We'll put maybe parentheses less what you owe. All right, so as you become more wealthy, and by the way, I just want to maybe highlight here that this is different than income. How? How does income differ from wealth?
Income is what you bring in, how much you already have.
So when you say bring in, you're correct. Bring in a little bit more detail. Over a time period. Good. So what you bring in over some time period is your income. So again, a few of you have maybe had a little accounting. We got the balance sheet, we got the income statement. Wealth is a balance sheet item. At a point in time, we can calculate the value of my assets minus the value of my debts, and I get my wealth. My income is a variable that has meaning over a time period. So I can look at what was I paid for the last 2 weeks. If I get paid a $750 check, my income that 2-week period was $750. All right, that's not what we're talking about here. We're looking at wealth. Now, if there's an increase in wealth, what do you think happens to our demand for financial assets like bonds? Would it tend to go up or down? Up. Right. So the more wealthy we get, the higher the bond demand tends to be. So I'm using this shorthand notation. An up arrow with a BD means a shift to the right. It kind of looks like a shift up, but it's better to be thinking left and right, because when we start bringing in the supply curve, then it's consistent. A shift to the right is always an increase. A shift to the left is a decrease. And it also makes sense with the interpretation of the variables. If I come back to here, what is my independent variable and what is my dependent variable in terms of a kind of a math perspective? What is the independent variable?
Price.
The price, right? So I'm determining how much I want to buy based on prices. Now, that is opposite, by the way, of what we usually learn in math class, with the y-axis being the independent or the dependent variable and the x down here. So it was more by historical accident that this evolved the way it did from Alfred Marshall, because he put the price up here and the quantity down here. It didn't have to be that way, but that's the way it is, so we have to live with it. So the reason I'm bringing this up with the shift left and right is that at this price, when the bond prices were running for these 10-year whatever bonds was $1,100, I used to want to buy this much. Now that I'm really wealthy, I want to buy this much. At prices down here, when they were equal to the face value, I used to want to buy this much. Now I want to buy this much. At this price, I used to want to buy this much. Now I want to buy this much. At this price, I used to want to buy this much. Now I want to buy this much. So at every price, I'm relocating my bond demand curve to a higher level at W2 for versus W1. Here my wealth was, I was a millionaire, and now I've got $2 million worth of net wealth. If we want to get rich real quick here, right? So as I became more wealthy, I wanted to hold on to more financial assets like bonds. Okay, questions on that? Good. Number 2 is the expected return. The expected return. So this is kind of expectations in a way. So this is the return expected over the next time period. On one asset relative to an alternative asset. So write that down. There's some key language here that differentiates this from what you might have been thinking. Expected return, inflation goes up. Is that good enough for us to want to buy less or more of the good? What's the key thing that is in this definition that I want you to hang on? Relative to the alternative. In other words, if inflation hits the economy and it hits all assets, then is that bond any more desirable than some other places you might want to put your money? No, they've all affected it together. So that's an important takeaway from this, is that it is the expected return relative to some other alternatives. The other thing that's key here is the next time period. So over that time horizon, we're usually going to be thinking kind of shorter term. Should I stay in this bond or should I dump it? The expected return of one relative to the other might make me want to participate and dump what I got or buy something different, right? I might want to swap, even though I might like that 10% interest over the life of it. The expected return changes relative to another. I might want to jump on it. All right, so if there's an increase in the expected interest rate, the expected return relative to another one, I won't write all that out. If the interest rates are expected to rise, that would lead to a decrease in the expected price. If current interest rates rose, leading to a decrease in bond demand, a shift to the left. So if interest rates are going to rise on bonds in general, if interest rates are expected to rise, interest rates rise, prices fall. Is it a good idea to hold bonds when their future price is expected to fall? Not a good idea. I might want to go into some other investment. And so there's a decrease in bond demand today. If there is, so this is one little case or possibility under this expected return. B, if there's an increase in expected inflation, that will lead to a decrease in the expected return. And if I'm expecting a real rate of return that's less now, why would I want to buy it? So I'm going to dump bonds if the real return falls. want to put one little extra note in here. When there is inflation, real assets are kind of good places to be. Real in terms of things you can touch and feel, like a car, maybe an old classic car, a house, right? Real assets tend to go up. The price, the value of the house tends to go up over time when there is inflation, whereas financial assets have this negative effect going on with the price of them. And so real assets tend to be a good place to go. So I just wanted to put this note for as far as alternatives go. An increase in expected inflation raises the real rate for real assets. Cars, houses, etc. And I mean collector cars. That would be not, cars are still fighting the depreciation issue going down, so not any, maybe I better put collector cars. Mona Lisas, might be time to go buy a Monet or something, right? So put your money into real assets. Okay, number 3, risk. So we're going to measure the degree of risk relative to an alternative. If bonds become more risky, more risk in a bond relative to another asset, people are going to buy less of them. A decrease in the bond demand. And then our final one is liquidity. The ease and speed an asset can be turned into cash. An asset can be turned into money, our most liquid asset. Relative to an alternative again. Relative to an alternative. If bonds have become more liquid, if there's an increase in liquidity, relative to things, I'm going to increase my bond demand. All right, there's your 4 shifters. We'll pick up there on Monday. Have a good weekend.